Hello and welcome to this round 12 here at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Hall of Famer Randy Buehler, and let's head down for the feature match area for a rematch between Jon Finkel and Brad Nelson here at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. Welcome to round 12 of Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Hall of Famer Randy Buehler, and we have a rematch on our hands. Last round, Brad Nelson was undefeated and in the last round of draft played against Jon Finkel. This round, Brad, he's up against him again, but we have constructed decks in front of us. Now, Randy, these are two kind of new decks. How on earth is this matchup meant to go?
I don't know. I'm not sure anyone in the world knows how this matchup goes. I'm not even sure this matchup's ever been played before.
Well,
Goggle's ramp against Seasons Past? Settle in. We'll find out.
Yeah, these decks both have very singularly unusual game plans. The Goggles ramp deck not necessarily doing much in the early turns beyond getting extra mana accelerants on the board, but some of its late game just massively powerful. It can cast World Breakers, it can cast Fall of the Titans, it can cast Chandra Flamecaller, and with Pyromancer's Goggles, with its red spells, it can double up on them. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jon Finkel's Black-Green Control also doesn't have much in the way of creatures, just has Kalatas Trait of Get, like we see in his hand there, but it has a lot of control elements, a lot of discard, and indeed a very, very strong late game in the form of Seasons Past.
Fiery Impulse and Kozilek's Return are Jon's choices with this duress.
Kozilek's Return's an interesting one. It's not going to be able to kill Kalatas, but it will mean that there's a way that Brad Nelson can deal with zombies in play. Unfortunately, when Kozilek's Return's in the graveyard, in some respects, it's more scary for Kalatas.
And Jon took the Fiery Impulse for exactly that reason.
So, yeah, Brad losing the Fiery Impulse. Early doors, he's just looking to get his hand how he wants. Now, discarding Drownyard Temple there to Tormenting Voices, kind of a nice one. That the land that you can pay 3 colorless mana to return to the battlefield at instant speed. So he gets to do a little bit of card drawing, but also potentially some mana acceleration there with that play.
Yeah, and Jon's like, there was no Tormenting Voice in that hand when I looked at it. Oh, there's the other reason to take the Fiery Impulse. It's such a mana-efficient answer for Nissa, which Jon is now playing.
Yeah, and as I say, not loads of creatures, but Nissa, there's 2 of them, Nissa Vastwood Seer. As and when Jon gets up to 7 lands in play, he's going to be able to transform Nissa, flip Nissa into a full Planeswalker and potentially be able to eke out card advantage that way. Interesting that this black-green deck really can play a card advantage war in the same way that a blue control deck might. It's just that it's not trying to win with counter spells, it's being a little bit more proactive with discard and removal.
Yeah, strategically, this does play very much like a blue deck. It is trade cards, draw cards in the late game, stop your opponent from doing anything powerful, and then eventually you just overwhelm them with your card advantage. It's like a Sphinx's Revelation deck from a couple of years ago, you know, a draw almost like a draw go deck from many years ago. It's just not using permission spells as the way to trade cards with the opponent. It's using removal instead.
And then you got that one out. Yeah. And then you put that one through. Got it.
So Nissa's Pilgrimage there, already with Spell Mastery for Brad Nelson, thanks to the discard from Jon Finkel getting rid of the Fiery Impulse earlier on, meaning that he is getting lots of extra forests going, both in terms of the ones in play and the ones in hand. Spell Mastery meaning that he's able to search for 3 basic forests, 1 going into play, the other 2 going to his hand. So Brad keeping his hand kind of full, admittedly a lot of that being lands. And things like Dragonlord Ataka in Brad Nelson's deck, not normally particularly exciting, but at the moment, Jon Finkel actually has a board where he would find himself in a little bit of trouble if that Dragonlord came down, and soon enough, Brad would be able to cast her.
Jon somehow has assembled a beatdown plan.
Yeah, I mean, Kalatas certainly fights the good fight, but 2 copies of Kozilek's Return, that's enough to kill them off, and yeah, no life gain there for Jon Finkel. I mean, that's not really the main thing that he's looking for here anyway.
No, I think though that Jon thought that Kalatas could actually do some damage, softening up Brad. It's like, all right, fine. My beatdown draw, I drew 2 of the 3 creatures in my deck, or 2 of the 4 creatures in my deck. Never mind. Let's go back to the card advantage plan. Read some bones.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to how the black-green control deck actually wins the game, and it's got lots of ways of establishing a controlling presence. It is still typically winning the game with creatures. It's just a matter of those creatures might be hissing Quagmire Spings, little Kalatas hits, and then just sort of incremental points here and there. It's just that it can so thoroughly dominate a game in terms of control that it's able to win with small hits. So certainly the fact that he's losing his creatures there, not ideal for Jon Finkel. Infinite Obliteration here, though. That's a one-of in the main deck for Jon Finkel. It's going to mean that he's going to name a creature and search his opponent's hand, graveyard, and library for any number of copies of that card and exile them. Now, here we find out how much Jon Finkel knows about the red-green Goggle ramp deck. I'm sure that he's heard little rumors and tell of what might be going on with it. I mean, it was certainly one of the talks of the tournament yesterday. I mean, I think that Worldbreaker would be a great choice.
And he did indeed name Worldbreaker.
Worldbreaker is one of those cards that actually gets around some of the other removal that Jon Finkel has quite nicely, because you can keep getting it back from the graveyard by sacrificing lands, and each time you're casting it, you are potentially exiling lands that the control deck has in play, and control decks love having lands.
What a crazy powerful spell.
Yeah,
This just completely changed the character of this whole matchup, right?
Well, it now means that Brad Nelson needs to carefully think about what his routes to victory are. He does have other creatures. He's got
one Dragonlord
Ataka,
two Chandra Flamecolors.
Yeah, Chandra Flamecaller certainly lets him deal a lot of damage in terms of combat by making elemental tokens. But I mean, the other big way that I've seen him winning games is by casting truly, I mean, gigantic isn't even the word. Huge copies of Fall of the Titan, and copy is an important element to that, because with Pyromancer Goggles, you can potentially have one Fall of the Titans actually act as 2 or even 3 copies.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the fact that we've talked about Jon's deck as a controlled deck, but without actual permission spells, he can just get 20 points of burn pointed at his head.
Yeah, I mean, he can use discard to mean that Brad doesn't have a copy of Fall of the Titans in hand, but he can't do anything to stop Brad simply drawing it. And there are quite a lot of ways of drawing cards for Brad Nelson's deck, between Tormenting Voice and... does he run any Magmatic Insight? Yeah, so in total he has 7 card drawing spells.
Yeah, he's already gone through like 3 or 4 of those.
And here we see a turn where, Magmatic Insight and Tormenting Voice, just casually meaning that Brad Nelson ripping through his deck, and when he finds one of these key spells, he can potentially just end the game very quickly. As things stand, though, he will need a lot of mana to do that, so hitting land drops each and every turn, very important.
What's this? 6 mana?
This is Pilgrimage.
Oh, I got excited.
I mean, this is kind of an exciting card.
Kind of.
It means that basically both of these decks are accelerating to their late game, and gaining 7 life will mean that the plan of Brad Nelson's to burn out Jon Finkel gets a little harder.
That's true. That's a good point.
Let's talk a little bit.
God, is that really his plan to beat he beats Fall of the Titans Goggles by just looping Nissa's Renewal and gaining too much life?
I mean,
that's a relevant thing. That could be how this game plays out. Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about what I think is possibly the key card in Jon Finkel's deck, that being Seasons Past, because that's how we're actually looping cards. Seasons Past, a very, very powerful addition from Shadows over Innistrad, that means that the black-green control deck can rebuy a lot of spells from the graveyard once the game gets into the super late stages. Basically, at the point that you cast it, you get to return 1 card of each different converted mana cost to your hand. Here we see it, Seasons Past, Nissa's Renewal, Infinite Obliteration, Kalatas, an Evolving Wilds, and a Duress, all returning to Jon Finkel's hand.
Brad's done. Scoops them up. Seasons Past, I concede.
Well, yeah, I mean, he has to think about time as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
he wants to win the next 2 games.
If there's going to be another Nissa's Renewal, if there's going to be all of these other things...
Well, Infinite Obliteration is going to resolve, and then what's he going to have left? Right?
Only burn at that point.
Or he's going to be deprived of his Fall of the Titans, and if only Chandra's, but he's not winning that
game.
We'll
find out how he does in the subsequent games soon enough, but for now, these messages.
Unravel the madness. Shadows over Innistrad is now available on Magic Online. Explore the new set by signing up for Magic Online at mtgo.com. Ready to take your game to the next level and start on the path to the Pro Tour? Rise to the challenge and test your skills at a local preliminary Pro Tour qualifier. To find an event near you, visit magic.wizards.com/pptq.
Hello and welcome back to this round 12 here at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. These players kind of in the final stretch here, but none of them yet able to lock up their top 8. This is the first round of our last 5 rounds of Standard. Jon Finkel and Brad Nelson, well, they're at their sideboards, but we got plenty more magic going on. We're going to get a chance to look in on our back table now. It looks like every game has just finished up. So let me give you an update on how the various games are going, given that we have so much shuffling going on. We can see that we have 2 great Italian players in our feature match area. Those being Andrea Mengucci and Marco Camilluzzi.
Yeah, that's half the World Magic Cup team.
Yeah, big high fives from them as they made their way into the feature match area. Unfortunately, sad faces for both of the Italians, who, normally an absolute joy to have in the feature match area because of all the big smiles. Both of them lost their game ones.
Okay, so that's Shota and Yol.
And then Steve Rumin on the back table, he won his game 1 with green-white tokens against Kyle Bogomus. Now, a couple of things in terms of the decks that we've got going on in our feature match area. Shota Yasuoka winning game 1 with Esper Dragons and winning it really quite quickly.
By the way, I did the day 2 metagame breakdown at lunch, and Esper Dragons was like the bottom deck on the field for day 1 metagame. It's like 10 copies or a couple % of the field. It got destroyed. No one other than Shota could win a game with Esper Dragons.
Well, I mean, Shota can win many games.
I'm just saying, it's pretty interesting. Shota is the control master. He can win games with Esper Dragons. No one else had any luck. Esper Control did all right. I mean, there's a Planeswalker-heavy version that a lot of teammates... That's what Seth Manfield's playing, for example. But, yeah, that Esper Dragons deck that Shota has looked good with in multiple feature matches did not do well. I think it advanced at like 38% of players when the par is 62%.
And then, meanwhile, Andrea Mengucci, he's playing against Joel Larson, and Joel, for this event, is actually on the same team as Brad Nelson. They're both on the red-green Goggle ramp deck that actually that entire team got locked in on with about a week to go before the Pro Tour even began. Yeah,
the way I heard the story, they were tentatively locked by about last Friday, and they were just watching last weekend's standard events with fingers crossed, hoping nobody would just upend the standard metagame. Because if it stayed Bant Company plus humans, they were very excited to play that metagame.
I mean, the interesting thing to me, of course, after every Pro Tour is where are we going? Because this season's past deck, as much as I like the Fall of the Titans plan with Pyromancer's Goggles, casting Seasons Past is just a joy. And this deck seems to be able to leverage it in a way that I certainly could never have anticipated.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about how good Shota's looked with Esper Dragons. Finkel has looked amazing with the Seasons Past deck, but Pantheon only put 62% through to day 2.
Interesting.
They had, for them, to advance at basically par. That is, black-green control decks put 62% through. I don't think everyone on Pantheon was on black-green control. But 62% of the black-green control decks, this season's past deck advancing, is merely par. 60% of the field, 62% of this deck. Now, some of that might be that they had a mediocre limited run, but we'll see.
As it is, though, we're ready to kick things off in our game 2 here between Brad Nelson and Jon Finkel. Brad kicking things off with a Forest there, fairly straightforward start for him. Turn 1 is not what it's all about for him in this matchup. It's all about the later turns in the game. Meanwhile...
traverse the Ulvenwald. I've had exactly that think that Brad just had in Limited. Like, do I want to just get a land now, or do I want to wait until I have Delirium and I can get a creature too?
Well, I caught a sneaky peek at some of the sideboarding that Brad Nelson had been doing on one of our cameras, and one of the cards he's brought in is Goblin Dark Dwellers, and you can set up a very cool play with Traverse the Ulvenwald once you have Delirium.
Absolutely.
Of fetch Goblin Dark Dwellers, play it, flash back my spell in order to fetch another creature, and potentially just sort of have this aggro creature plan without having to run lots of creatures.
Wow, that's a great sideboard plan.
As things stand, Goblin Dark Dwellers...
Shocking that Brad Nelson has a good sideboard, right? He showed up with 75 cards instead of 60, to the surprise of absolutely no one.
So Tormenting Voice there, letting Brad Nelson draw out of what was a little bit of a land-heavy hand. He's also got a Tireless Tracker here, which means that he is going to be able to go on a more of a creature beatdown plan. We'll see whether or not Finkel's sideboarding has reflected this shift in philosophies, I guess, from Brad Nelson's deck.
Yeah, Tireless Tracker into Goblin Dark Dwellers is quite a different curve from what we saw in Brad doing game 1.
And a lot of options here for Finkel. He's got a Naturalize in his hand. Clearly respecting the Pyromancer's Goggles.
Indeed.
In the meantime, though, a choice between a Read the Bones when he's already got kind of a full hand and a Nissa Varswood Seer for his third turn, assuming that he's got appropriate mana to cast them. Many of the lands in the black-green deck come into play tapped, and it looks like actually Finkel here sat without a third land.
Have a land.
Yeah, discarding a Nissa's Renewal, not where you want to be. So Nelson here, for now, he's quite happy to just develop his mana base, not going to expose any creatures to removal, because I suppose that he's thinking, well, Jon's got to have something in that hand. One perfectly reasonable assumption to make is that there could be a whole bunch of removal spells. And I think that one of the interesting things for this matchup, I mean, at this point, both these players doing so well that it is start worth thinking about how this deck plays out in top 8. We've got how this matchup plays now. How does this matchup play when both players have full access to deck lists?
True. Jon finally found land 3. And it brings with it land 4 via Nissa.
Yep, there's that forest. Hissing Quagmire, a big piece in the puzzle for this black-green control deck, because it does want to win at some point, and being able to attack in and actually have a land that, if it gets killed as a creature, it's got a converted mana cost of 0, it can get bought back with Seasons Past just as well as anything else. Also, of course, with Death Touch, trading with just about everything. All right, so now we're kind of hitting the point where Brad Nelson can start doing cool stuff. He's got 5 mana. Is he going to go with a Goblin Dark Dwellers or the Pyromancer's Goggles? Looks like it's the Dark Dwellers. He does not have Delirium, so he's not going to be going for a Traverse the Elven World. Instead, Tormenting Voice, just drawing some more cards. I say just, you know, it's the best thing in the world.
I agree. Converting some of the extra lands he's accumulated into spells.
Goblin Dark Dwellers, I think, my favorite individual card in Standard.
Wow.
It just does so many things that I really enjoy. Huge amount of value for that 5 converted mana cost, 4/4 menace, and then the ability to flashback spells in the graveyard, just huge. And there we see Brad remembering that it is flashback, hence exiled. It doesn't just stick around in the graveyard. So one interesting card that's in Jon Finkel's deck is Dark Petition. At 5 mana, kind of an expensive tutor effect, but with Spell Mastery, you get 3 of that mana back. Right now, Jon, only the 1 spell in the graveyard. He's not had the customary early flurry of discard spells, so not able to power up Spell Mastery just yet. Instead, choosing to play Kalatas this turn, sit back. He's got enough creatures that if he so chooses, he can block that Goblin Dark Dwellers.
There's the Goggles.
Now, Pyromancer's Goggles, very powerful indeed once you have any red spell at all. And Magmatic Insight, you only have to discard a card, discard a land once to cast it. So effectively, that was 1 mana, discard 1 card, draw 4.
Yeah, you see the way Brad played this is super smart, too. You were saying last turn he had the choice between the Dark Dwellers and the Goggles. But he wanted to set it up, I think, where he could Goggles and also copy a spell.
Yeah,
before exposing it to whatever anti-artifact cards Jon might have in his sideboard.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if Naturalize gets played on the Goggles, yes, that will be a fine play, but equally, Brad has already got his value. He doesn't need to get a huge amount more.
Exactly. I mean, Jon needs to Naturalize it, but he's still going to be down. He's already down a card on this exchange. Maybe 2, depending on how you want to count.
So Jon's starting off with Transgress the Mind, just to make sure that he's not got even bigger concerns. He sees Chandra Flamecaller, but unfortunately he sees a pair of Chandra Flamecaller. So even though he's going to be able to exile one of those if he so chooses, there is still the imminent threat of a Planeswalker. On top of that, a Tireless Tracker and a Traverse the Elven Wild. The Traverse the Elven Wild, well, that can't be taken by Transgress the Mind. And the rest lands, so they're not too big a concern.
Jon does have a Ruinous Path in his hand. He can kill a Chandra. Maybe you just start investing in slogging through them.
I mean, I think both of these players knew that they'd signed up to a long game.
Yes. And
the good thing about the transgress the mind if this game goes super duper long is it is exiling cards, gradually leaving Brad without any possibility of doing clever recursion or using Goblin Dark Dwellers to flash things back. I mean, not relevant for Chandra, but certainly for some of the other spells in Brad's deck, there's still kind of a value in the graveyard. There we see Naturalize dealing with Pyromancer's Goggles, leaving just Goblin Dark Dwellers as the lone non-land permanent in play for the former Player of the Year, Brad Nelson.
They're both former Players of the Year.
Yeah, I realized I had to clarify with the name at the end there.
You know, we've got world champions flying around the top of the standings, Players of the Year. John's just both.
Yep. John has done pretty much everything.
Yeah, we were talking about career top 8s. He has 15 top 8s in his career. Could get number 16 this weekend. Second place is 10.
Yeah, he has a resume that would have got him in the Hall of Fame after he got in the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, I think you could probably build 3 Hall of Fame careers out of his resume at this point.
There we see his stats. Just 78 Pro Tours, 15 top 8s, a 63.3% win percentage, which might sound like it's not that much better than 50-50, but these are the best players in the world playing,
Yeah,
and to achieve that over the number of matches that he's played is frankly spectacular.
Yeah, the best in the world at the height of their powers are at like 65%. John's also now in the lead for the limited master spot at Worlds after 6-0ing limited so far this weekend. He's also near the top of the constructed master standings.
He's also approaching his 1,000th match at the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
So 2 copies of Tyler's Tracker coming into play. Tyler's Tracker does get kind of better in multiples because they each are making clues whenever a land comes into play, and they're each getting bigger whenever those clues get sacrificed. So they represent some fairly sizable threats that John's going to want to deal with sooner rather than later if he can. Finkel here, he's got a little bit of removal. He's also got Dark Petition, which can potentially fetch him a Languish at some point, but that point will have to be comparatively soon because he's in a little bit of trouble here. He's got 5 mana, that meaning the Dark Petition can't quite fetch and then give him mana to cast Languish, but...
Yeah, the mana's really been his issue this game. He's been scrapping just to get enough mana to cast his spells. Is he at the point where he can cast 2 spells now? I guess he can cast an Ultimate Price and a Ruinous Path.
Definitely a temptation to do so here. And we see him, yep, firing off a Ruinous Path. 2 mana left open. I mean, the cool thing about the Seasons Past deck is that with some decks, you need to really worry about metering your spells, knowing when to hold back your removal for a bigger threat. Knowing that you have Seasons Past somewhere in the tank, especially searchable by Dark Petition, means that you can afford to fire off a bunch of spells safe in the knowledge that you can then get them back. Yeah, this is not a format with a lot of graveyard hate yet.
Yeah, well, there's Kalatas taking the Tireless Trackers away from Brad's graveyard. I mean, I think John does kind of need that Ruinous Path to deal with the Chandra that he knows he left in Brad's hand. At the same time, though, John is holding a Seasons Past. He just needs a 6th land to turn it on.
John also getting a couple of zombie tokens from the Kalatas there as the various creatures were killed off. It looks like we just got a quick judge call here. They're just making sure that everything is as it should be.
It looks like Forgotten Lifelink, maybe?
Possibly.
Yeah, look at John's hand. Still full of gas.
Yeah, he's got the Seasons Past he needs now.
The Seasons Past. So he needs the 6th land is what he needs. And he needs to not get sort of tempoed out. John's deck, I mean, look, we talked about how we weren't even sure this matchup had ever been played before, much less understood how it matched up. John's deck looks great in the matchup. I think that the Seasons Past deck just has a better late game than the Goggles deck.
A couple of updates for you from our back tables. It's still misery for the Italians in our feature match area because in blistering fashion, Shota Yasoka has defeated Marco Camiluzzi, and Joel Larsen has also defeated Andrea Mengucci. Both those matches straight 2-0 victories. Just Kyle Bogemer's against Steve Rubin on the back table still going on here, apart from this, our main match. And Chandra coming down immediately, -4 loyalty. That enough to clear the board. There is a zombie in play, that not technically the same zombie. As Kalatas died, the parting gift, a final zombie coming along there. So Jon able to get in a little plink here and there.
Really love the way Brad has sequenced this. Like, you saw him with play the tireless tracker so that he could, one land could turn into 2 clues. He's doing everything that he can to sort of eke all the value out of his deck that is possible. But yeah, he's against a deck with a bunch of removal and Seasons Past. I don't know how he ever recovers.
Yeah, because that Seasons Past, it doesn't go to the graveyard even once you cast
it goes to the bottom of the library, where you can get it with Dark Petition. You can just loop them forever.
Yeah, cast Dark Petition, find Seasons Past, cast Seasons Past, get back Dark Petition, put Seasons Past on the bottom of my deck, keep on going.
Only 4 cards this time, but jeez.
Yeah, Jon Finkel, he spent a bunch of cards to stay alive in the early rush. He's now got all of those cards back, and Brad Nelson, I mean, to his credit, actually has quite a lot of cards still to work with.
And this is a game where Jon discarded hand size on turn 3. He missed his 3rd land drop and discarded a Nissa's Renewal. This is that game. I think that 15 top 8 mark may be going to 16.
And I tell you what, if you need to practice this matchup for the top 8 overnight, those games could go real long. Because that game 1 where we saw Brad concede, I don't think you would necessarily see that quite as quickly in an untimed match.
Fair.
So Traverse the Elden Wild, I believe that Delirium may be a factor now.
I would think so. Yeah, it is.
We have heard that we are going to get a game 3 on our back table match as Kyle Bogomis does square things up against Steve Rubin.
Den Protector for Brad also came in from the sideboard. I like his sideboard has got tools that could potentially help him in this matchup. And I mean, it's possible I'm calling this prematurely.
Yeah, I very much like the fact that cards are going to be able to come back from the graveyard for Brad as well here. And that part of the reason that I flagged up the Transgress the Mind as being important.
Right.
Properly getting rid of cards from the matchup entirely, always going to be important. And Den Protector, kind of a known factor, even if this deck wasn't going into the tournament. We can see Jon Finkel there carefully checking out what's in the graveyard.
Yeah, there's just none of those cards are as good as Seasons Past.
Yeah, I mean, Chandra's certainly very good, but right now, Seasons Past looking excellent. And once we see Jon casting Nissa's Pilgrimages and indeed Nissa's Renewal, then we're in all sorts of trouble.
It's interesting. A lot of what Standard, I think, is going to be about today is, okay, day 1 was about beating Bant Company and getting to the top of the Swiss. And Bant Company advanced at, only 55%, where 62% is par. But now, what happens when the decks that can beat Bant Company get paired up against each other? That's what we're going to be finding out this afternoon. How do those matchups work? How are you against green-white tokens? How about the Aristocrats deck that Luis and company are crushing it with?
Also a very cool deck. I mean, that one designed by Matt Nass. This one designed by Reed Duke and William Jensen. So a lot of pedigree in the deck design that's going on all over the place on our top tables here. Yeah, really showing the rewards of preparation.
If you look at just advancement percentages from day 1 to day 2, Goggles Ramp over 90%, Aristocrats over 90%. Yep. Like, those were the 2 decks that crushed it the most. Green-white tokens also did well. I mean, mono-white humans did solidly. This black-green control deck doesn't look as impressive on those stats. But if they got here, if they're good in those matchups, it's a new metagame today. This is just a different group of decks that you have to play against.
Okay, so we have a Pyromancer's Goggles in play, and that's certainly a big play for Brad Nelson because that one of his big sources of potential damage. I mean, the number of lands he has in play, if he's able to tap Pyromancer's Goggles and cast Fall of the Titans, potentially we could see this game turn around really fast, even with Jon Finkel on 22 life. He's immediately able to cast what looks like a Tormenting Voice here in order to draw 4 cards. Doesn't necessarily even need the cards from the graveyard quite so much now. He's used his Den Protector here to get back that those Goggles. Has drawn a Fall of the Titans, so this could be a big setup here. The tricky bit for Jon Finkel is that Fall of the Titans will not get hit by Transgress the Mind. He needs a Duress if he's going to take that spell because in hand, X is 0, whereas, well, when he casts it, X is going to be quite a lot more.
Yeah, the other thing that's going on here? Jon did not get the Naturalize. Because he got the Transgress the Mind, that was the 2-mana spell that he got back with that Seasons Past a couple turns ago, which means his Naturalize is sitting in the graveyard,
And that could be pretty tough considering that the Goggles is a very powerful threat.
Exactly. Okay, he's going to transgress first and see what's up. Yeah, all right. Transgress first, and now he sees what's up. Is that Fall of the Titans just lethal already?
It's certainly close. I mean, basically, one of the things that Brad Nelson is going to need to achieve is to surge it. If he casts it without surge, then he's paying X twice, effectively, and that's not a particularly efficient burn spell. However, if he can cast any small spell first, then all of a sudden, being able to cast Fall of the Titans with surge and double it, if it's not lethal, it's certainly close.
He's got a Tormenting Voice in his hand to be the first spell. But yeah, Jon, Dark Petition. He knows what he needs to deal with.
I mean, Dark Petition for duress?
Quite possibly. I don't think he's got time to go through a Seasons Past here. Could also be Naturalized, but Duress is probably better. Yeah, he got Naturalized.
I use black and naturalize goggles. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that once you've dealt with the Goggles, Fall of the Titans killing you is really tough.
Right. And if he leaves that Goggles in play, it's going to get used on a Tormenting Voice.
So read the bones, helping Jon draw cards here.
It does mean the Dark Petition did not get Seasons Past, so he's kind of lost that ability to loop Seasons Past inevitably. He just didn't have time. Like when he used this Transgress, he's like, oh geez, I could die next turn. I don't have time to Dark Petition for Seasons Past to get the Naturalize out of my graveyard. I'm just going to have to use this Dark Petition and solve my current problem immediately.
I mean, he does have 4 copies of Dark Petition in the main. Whether or not they've all stayed in is a little bit of a question, but there's still definitely potential for him to set up that loop. And he still has Infinite Obliteration, which means that if this does end up going to a Game 3, if Jon's already cast Infinite Obliteration, he'll have all of the information as to how Brad has sideboarded for this second game.
Yep.
Searching for creature cards. It's important in terms of potentially winning one match, but also the amount of information gained is a very big deal, and Jon Finkel exactly the kind of player that you can imagine leveraging that information very, very well.
Sure. It's funny, it's actually possible that Brad would concede to an Infinite Obliteration just so Jon doesn't get the knowledge of how exactly he sideboards. This is a matchup that could come up a couple times over the course of today in a couple different people's hands, right?
Dragonlord Ataka in hand here for Brad Nelson. That one that I'm a little surprised to still see in there, though I guess it's hard to argue with an 8/8 for 7 that flies. It looks like a second Den Protector being morphed down there for Brad Nelson, threatening to get back the Pyromancer's Goggles for a third time.
Mm-hmm.
Hedron Archive also helping Brad Nelson in his plan of generating a crazy amount of mana, or indeed just drawing a crazy amount of cards, which he's been doing relatively successfully throughout this match. So another Dark Petition here from Finkel.
Indeed.
Dark Petition.
And that is what he casts.
Seasons Past time? It's probably Seasons Past time. He gets 3 mana from the Dark Petition since he's at Spell Mastery.
And this time round, given that he's already cast a big Nissa's Renewal already, he has enough lands in play that even after a season's passed, he may be able to cast a little bit more.
Yeah, he'll have 3 or 4 mana left over.
We'll find out soon enough exactly what it was that Jon Finkel searched up. I mean,
we got it to rest. Interesting. So he's really worried about that Fall of the Titans.
No,
As he should be. I mean, Den Protector flipping to get Goggles. Goggles is the first spell, and then you tap it for the Fall of the Titans, right? Yeah, I think Jon would die next turn to Den Protector getting Goggles, and then Goggles being used on that X spell.
yeah, there wouldn't be, because Fall of the Titans is an instant, there wouldn't necessarily be much that he could do in response to
This is cute.
the tapping of the Pyromancer's Goggles.
He's going to kill the Den Protector, forcing Brad to flip it now during Jon's turn, so that Jon has the ability to attack Brad's hand while presumably the Goggles is in it.
Sure.
He gets a zombie for killing the Den Protector. And now, does he have a Transgress or just a Duress? Transgress would obviously be better, but yeah, he'll settle for Duress. I'm guessing Goggles. So what is he?
Well,
He sees
there is a Fall of the
Tarka.
Titans too.
Right, but the Goggles is... it represents so much inherent card advantage. Like, that Fall of the Titans isn't that scary without Goggles, right?
Yeah, I mean, at 14 life, I don't think that Brad's going to be able to get there for a little while, but...
Changes this. He sees no target for Goggles, so maybe that's changed his mind.
Ultimate Price staying in hand, giving him an answer to Dragon Lord Ataka, though given time, he could use Infinite Obliteration on it as well, as a kind of preemptive removal spell that lets him keep his board around. Right now, though, Brad gets to untap. Twelve lands in play for Brad Nelson, in addition to a Hedron Archive, so mana is not an issue. It may be tempting for him to sacrifice the Hedron Archive just to draw a couple of extra cards here.
Sure. He drew... Oh, he's going to play a Tarka. Somehow Dragon Lord Atarka is not the most powerful thing going on. She is this turn.
Yeah, right now.
Shadow 11. Yep.
And actually, the ultimate price that John has going on, not the right answer here.
Right. Man, I thought John was so far ahead, and Brad has just sequenced everything so beautifully. The Den Protectors in from the sideboard have just been 2-for-1s. And it's not like he's done some one crazy powerful thing. He's just 2-for-1ing him and 2-for-1ing him and forcing John to use Dark Petition on Naturalize, forcing John to use Dark Petition on Duress. And now John's actually running out of stuff.
Yeah,
Like, he needs to refill with a Season's Pass to actually win this game now. And Brad's calmly looping Den Protector. So that was Goblin Dark Dwellers for the
Traverse the Elven Wild.
Traverse the Irvinwald, yes.
In order to then get another Den Protector.
Is Brad going to win this game?
It's going to need to be a good draw.
There's a Duress, but the board is the problem now.
I love the way that this matchup goes. I really do not mind at all if we see more of this over the course of our weekend.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, I thought John was way in front, but Brad has played this game great.
I guess that my one concern for this matchup, at least in the Swiss of this tournament, is how it's going in terms of time.
Yeah, no, that's definitely
Each of
a
these
concern.
games is not the sort of game that is ending quickly. I mean, there's enough control from John's control deck that he's able to make it so that Brad can't just steamroll him. I mean, there's a little over 10, 12 minutes or so left on this round.
13 sounds like.
At which point, if Finkel can't win it here, he may need to consider scooping it up.
Test. Infinite Obliteration. And then Den Protector.
Well, I mean, free information is...
And he gets the Den Protector out of Brad's hand. Gets to look at the deck, gets the Den Protector. It's pretty good. He's like, okay, still see a World Breaker.
Oh no, that's in play. They're all team.
Second Atark is in there. Noted. John just, that was a lot of information that will be useful to him in game 3 if we get there. Will be useful to him if he gets to this matchup again.
Not the rest of them. Sure.
Also uses the duress to just deal with the Pyromancer's Goggle is in hand. May as well get that out of the way. And we can see that John's moved his Hissing Quagmire to the front, just to sort of make clear that, yes, he does have blockers.
All right, ultimate price for the Den Protector. But Atarka plus a Burn Spell. Brad drew Burn Spell off the top. Fall of the Titans was good enough after Atarka softened John up a little.
On to game 3, and this is going to be a big game 3. This is going to be the one where all of that information that John just gained from looking directly through Brad Nelson's deck will be able to impact on his sideboarding. I mean, John, I think, probably one of the best placed to be able to process that information quickly of anyone on the Pro Tour.
Yes.
Effectively, being on the Pro Tour for as long as he had means that he's just trained in looking at a deck and taking it all in. But we're going to get a look in on the other match that's still going on here. This is a Game 3 between Kyle Bogomus and Steve Rubin. Kyle on the left of our screen there, he's playing Bant Company, and Steve Rubin on the right, he's on green-white tokens. And we can see there that there's a Nissa with 9 loyalty. That's got to be a good thing for Steve, alongside an evolutionary leap that means that even if there are little bits and pieces of removal being played, reflector mages and so on pointed at his creatures, he has the option to just search up more creatures instead.
You haven't seen a ton of this green-white tokens deck on camera, but it's good.
Yeah, it's something that was being run by Tiago Saporito, and it looks like Steve Rubin's list has some similarities also. We can see a Tragic Arrogance in the graveyard, which is a great tool against the Bant Company deck, which is kind of looking to go wide ultimately.
Yeah, both those players are testing with face-to-face games for this tournament, so may not be immediate. They don't seem like the typical Canadian core for that deck, but team's been adding some talent for sure.
So Steve Rubin here looking to press the advantage, I would imagine, based on having got Kyle down to 9 life. He's already got a large Sylvan Advocate on the board. 6 lands means that it would normally be a 4/5, but thanks to Nissa, it's a 5/6 creature. We'll find out what that token is for you there, just so we can make things nice and clear. There we go. It is a plant token, so it starts off as a 0/1. And it's not often that you see a Sylvan Advocate being tapped, but Bounding Krasis will do that. Vigilance meaning that normally on attacks it's fine, but Archangel Avacyn, a big addition to the board here for Steve Rubin. And that enough to elicit the handshake from Kyle Bogomus. Steve Rubin wins that one. He is now at 10-2. Fantastic position for Steve Rubin as we approach the final stages of the standard rounds of this tournament. He's got 4 rounds left to go. And realistically, 3 wins, you're happily in. 3 losses, you're happily in.
Yep.
4 losses is where you start having to cross your fingers just a little bit. Looks like a quick comfort break for both Jon Finkel and Brad Nelson. That was a pretty intense game that they had for Game 2.
It really was.
Both of these players will be sort of psyching themselves up as much as anything. We can see Brad just coming back to the table here, finishing off his sideboarding. But we're just going to take a look around the room. There are a lot of matches still going on here at Pro Tour Shadows over in Innistrad. We can see all sorts of players figuring out the best lines. This field, certainly not as large as it was yesterday. It's only those that at least hit a 4-4 record that are able to make it into day 2. But the stakes that much higher, which means that in some respects, even though there's less matches to finish, those matches players are taking a little bit more time to make sure that they get all of their decisions absolutely perfect. I can see Robin Dolar there in the background. His match is still going on. A number of other players either playing or indeed watching what's happening with other matches. Yuta Takahashi there, seeing what Pro Tour champion Ari Lax is up to. Just so you know, just based on that little comfort break and a couple of little breaks on our coverage, our feature match area running on a slightly different clock, so we've got a little bit more time than perhaps some of the matches elsewhere in the room going. So even if you see these tables thinning out a bit, you know, Mike Sigrist still playing up there, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be out of time in our feature match area. We certainly want to bring you as much magic as possible. Let's take a very quick look at the sideboards between Brad Nelson and Jon Finkel, though, just to see if there's any cards that are sort of really clear additions. One that's kind of interesting to me in Jon Finkel's list, Orbs of Warding. So this is a really interesting card that it does 2 things, but both at a relatively expensive cost. It means that you have hexproof, and that whenever you are dealt damage, you're dealt 1 point less damage by each individual source. So great against sort of massive swarms of tiny creatures. Great against small
How is it
bits and
against
pieces.
X spells pointed at your face?
Absolutely spectacular. I have to wonder whether or not being able to search your one of Orbs of Warding with a Dark Petition isn't just a complete game breaker, and I'm really intrigued, actually.
Right, John he used a Dark Petition on a Duress and a Dark Petition on a Naturalize, both in an effort to just not get killed by Fall of the Titans. So he must not have had it in his deck.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder whether or not in Game 3 that's going to be a consideration.
Giving himself hexproof would have just solved that Fall of the Titans plan.
I mean, I guess it's only good against Fall of the Titans, but if Fall of the Titans is the best way of Brad Nelson killing you, then that seems very strong indeed. Looking at the sideboard for Brad Nelson, there aren't the sort of artifact removal spells that he would need to be able to deal with an Orbs of Warding even. It may well be that in the long game, if Jon can find a way of staving off the creature rush, and I say rush in loose terms because it's not a big beatdown deck, that one of Orbs of Warding could be a really big deal.
Could be. Now, that said, Brad had essentially maneuvered that game to where he was probably going to win with creatures anyway, right? He was hitting with a Dragon Lord Atarka that Jon didn't have an answer to, and the Fall of the Titans just sort of sped it up again. But then again, the previous Fall of the Titans forced Jon to use those Dark Petitions somewhat less efficiently than maybe he would have liked to.
Yeah, I mean, if Jon can get in a position early where he's only having to expend a small number of resources to lock off one entire element of Brad's game plan, then he can just focus on dealing with creatures.
Yep.
Now, some of this stuff are things that are going to take a little bit longer for perhaps
Oh, yeah. I have no idea whether...
to wash out, but...
I have no idea whether Jon was expecting Tireless Tracker, Den Protector, Goblin Dark Dwellers as the sideboard plan. That felt like really good tech from Brad. And he was able to leverage it to win a game that I had already written him off in.
Scratch.
So,
Mull to 6 for Brad.
yeah, and we can
Looks
see
like
that he's got a good way of getting out of it, both Tormenting Voice and Magmatic Insight, though an early duress from Jon Finkel will have the option of taking one of them, or indeed the Chandra Flamecaller sat at the sort of top end of his curve there. Goes for Magmatic Insights just because that's the most mana-efficient option. Game Trail coming down, revealing a mountain, so it comes into play untapped. We have about 11 minutes left on this round, so we're going to see each of these players playing at a pretty brisk rate here. Second duress, I'm presuming taking the other card drawing spell here because Brad doesn't have a huge amount going on just yet. I guess part of that will come down to
Takes
how
the
quickly you
Hedron
get Chandra.
Archive. Because what's Brad going to discard the Tormenting Voice, right? He's on a mulligan. He's already been duressed twice. Brad kind of wants all his cards, so Jon left him the Tormenting Voice and took away the Hedron Archive.
Good stuff. And Brad Nelson put to think a little bit. He does look like he's shuffling that Tormenting Voice to the front of his hand. Traverse the Elven World, I believe, was one of the pickups there. And I think he does have Chandra Flamecaller. Yeah, that got hit by Transgress the Mind. So, Fall of the Titans, the draw there for Brad Nelson. But for now, we're on kind of draw go. And when Jon Finkel is drawing extra cards and scrying with his Read the Bones, one has to think that he's in pretty good shape. It's just going to be a matter of whether or not he can actually win a quick game.
Looks like he's got Kalitas in his hand, so he does have a creature that he can potentially start attacking with. Also, plenty of card drawing.
Meanwhile, Brad just playing land go for now.
17 to 21.
Both players playing quickly. Both players want this to come to a result. Jon's crying both to the bottom.
2 less life. Go ahead. Yeah, 19 to 17 right now.
Den Protector for Brad.
First. Fall Cletus, fall you. You got 15.
Just sorcery, land.
Go.
Okay. Yeah, uses the Traverse so that he can surge out Fall of the Titans and kill Kalitas. Makes sense.
And here's our first petition of the game. Spell Mastery very much achieved.
Spell Mastery seems a little easier than Delirium.
Yeah, I would say so. So he's going to get search for a card. He will have 3 black mana floating in his mana pool.
17, 15.
And with a Read the Bones in hand, that makes for some easy card drawing.
I think the card he got was Seasons Pass, by the way.
That makes
Read.
sense.
I'll just take those two.
13.
Good enough.
Good. Go.
So a face down card there, which we'll presume is a Den Protector.
Mm-hmm.
And there we have it. Yes, it is.
Brad with one other card left in his hand. Just a mountain, though.
Now, Finkel's in a funny old spot where if he does cast Seasons Past sometime soon, he's going to end up with a crazy amount of cards in hand.
Yeah, Dark Petition.
So he's casting a Dark Petition. Having a little think about what best to fetch. He's got both Ruinous Path and Infinite Obliteration in hand just as spells that he can easily immediately cast off that black mana.
Got a duress.
Ruinous Path.
Uses the floating mana to kill Den Protector.
So 7 minutes
Here-
left on the clock, but
John's done this very clever thing again of killing Den Protector main phase, forcing Brad to decide what he wants to get back,
Sure.
and then John wants to just take it out of his hand.
Duress. Yep.
This has just been a pleasure to watch. Both these guys are such good Magic players.
Good.
So now we have the big Seasons Pass.
Indeed.
1, 3, 5, 4.
4. 2? Is there a 2? Transgress?
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These guys goes on bottom. Sure.
Just 5.
I'll transgress you.
Play a land, play that Transgress the Mind. And how many cards does that leave Jon Finkel with in hand? I think it's exactly 7.
Of course it is. Wow.
Another Dark Petition to pick up there.
Yeah, Brad drew a land. John drew a Dark Petition.
Dark Petition. Sure.
John just needs to close this game out at this point. He's obviously a
Obliteration.
million miles ahead.
Naming. Dragon Lord Tarka.
Infinite Obliteration for Dragon Lord Atarka. Just doesn't want that to be able to come down, not be ultimate priceable, and kill his Kalatas or whatever. And be a little tricky.
Makes
to kill.
absolute sense. Trying to close the door, but he has to at least keep in mind the clock ever ticking on this game.
Yep. It seems like he's going to have time to win.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the happy spot of he's got his recursive loop set up such that Brad needs to kill Kalatas an awful lot before Kalatas is not going to just keep on trucking. I mean, there's the potential for John to Ruinous Path his own Kalatas to animate a land just to speed his clock up.
Funny.
I don't think that we're going to see that here. It's not really necessary, but one way or another, John is sooner or later going to be able to pummel on through here.
I'll duress you. Sure, use other mana.
Duresses, sees a land.
Nissa. Sure.
Ah, Nissa.
That will help.
Go to my bottom.
Play a land. Flip.
Sure. I'll flip Nissa. Yeah. Make a 4/4.
And
Yeah,
let's
Ashaya's
have
coming along.
Ashaya.
So now we have 7 points of damage coming through, and Worldbreaker,
Oh.
a big top deck though.
Indeed.
Exile.
There's a nice non-land permanent,
Yeah. Okay.
or non-creature permanent, sorry, to hit.
You know cards?
Hits artifact, enchantment, or land, so it gets rid of one of John's lands.
Get a zombie.
Yes, Ruinous Path deals with the Worldbreaker for now.
Thank you. 3,
But-
4, 5, 11.
Jeez.
11 damage coming through regardless.
All right. Go ahead.
Wow.
And there's the handshake. Jon Finkel, King of the Hill. We'll see him in the feature match area next round, but absolutely crushing there. And once this Season Pass deck reaches the point where it can happily be casting Dark Petitions into Seasons Past, into Dark Petitions, and within that loop also be casting discard spells and removal, it just seems incredibly powerful. Really super duper impressed with how that went from Jon Finkel. I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of him in the feature match area. And
Yes, please.
realistically, I think we're probably going to see a fair amount of Brad Nelson in the feature match area too. That only his second loss. Brad Nelson has only lost to Jon Finkel so far this tournament. It just so happens that he's lost to Jon Finkel for 2 rounds in a row. And that's actually shades of Pro Tour Kuala Lumpur, where Guillaume Wafotapo basically
Only
just
lost to
lost to
John.
Jon Finkel. Of course, John walking away with the trophy on that one.
This totally looks like a matchup we could be watching again tomorrow. These two players in these two decks.
100%. And honestly, if that happens,
Sounds good to me.
I'm in. Yeah. completely. It's going to be fantastic. But a lot of interesting plays in that matchup, a lot of interplay, a lot of sort of knowledge gradually being gleaned about how the matchups work, which is going to be very cool. But for now, we're going to send things across to the news desk because there's been a huge amount of action that we want to bring you from elsewhere here at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad.
There certainly has, Tim Willoughby. Thank you so much for the call there in round number 12. 1 down, 4 to go. So Jon Finkel 11-1, Brad Nelson 10-2. The world number 2 and reigning world champion Seth Manfield is up to 10-2. Luis Salvato is 9-3. But Luis Scott Vargas is up to 11-1. Now, that doesn't sound too surprising when you think he was 8-0 overnight. But if you watched him draft this morning, how on earth has he got to 11-1? Let's find out. Here he is in the company of our own Brian David Marshall.
Thanks, Rich. I'm here with Luis. Luis, how did Standard go for you this round?
I won. I beat a Jun deck with main deck Kalidas, which is not something I was expecting to do.
And that's kind of a warm-up question, because what I really want to ask you about...
Got a fever.
Yeah, I do have a fever. What was going on in that draft? Walk us through your emotional state and the state of your deck.
So there are some highs and lows. I first picked Lightning Axe, great card. Second pick, Nearheath Chaplain, also a very good card. Third pick, there was nothing good in the pack except a Fevered Visions, a card which I consider very good in blue-red aggro and fairly unplayable elsewise. I took the Fevered Visions, got another one like 5th pick, and it just went, all right, I'm going to draft this blue-red deck. I picked up a couple late red cards. I was feeling really good after pack 1. Pack 2, I first picked Daring Sleuth, 2 mana, 2/1 with no abilities. Second picked Emberheart Wolf, 2 mana, 1/2 haste, so you can pump it. The card is horrible. I don't want to play this card. Like, third pick, like Gotstaff Arsonists. I followed up with, like, Hulking Brute, another Ember Wolf. Like, pack 2 of that draft was, I think, the worst pack I've ever had in a tournament. I got no playables. I got like 2 playables out of it. Pack 3, I got another Fevered Visions, and then just built the like most aggressive, bounce-heavy Fevered Visions deck I could.
So what are you hoping to do when you open a card like Fevered? What do you want that deck to look like?
You want to have a good curve of really cheap creatures, and you want bounce spells. Bounce spells are so good when you have Fevered Visions because, first of all, you're trading up on mana. You're spending 2 mana to bounce their 4 or 5 mana creature. Also, more cards in hand means they take damage off Fevered Visions. Both players have more cards they can use if there's an early Fevered Visions. So the fact that you're down a card on the bounce spell isn't relevant. I had 2 Ghostly Wings in my deck, and they were actually great. I would have played 4 in my deck if I could.
And then what was when you get done with the draft, where do you grade the deck in terms of, like, what kind of record were you anticipating that could yield?
I thought I was going to get, the most likely scenario was, I thought it was like 2-1 or 1-2 or 2 most likely for sure, and it was actually going to be pretty matchup dependent. Slow control decks have a real big problem with Fevered Visions, and I played against like Seth Manfield, and he had a bug control deck that really couldn't beat the card Fevered Visions. Granted, he got mana screwed against me, so it didn't actually even come up, but...
You played against Brad Nelson, who was also playing a 3-color deck. How did that play out?
Well, game 1 I rolled a 5 and just never put up any resistance. Game 2 I killed him with Fevered Visions on turn 3. Game 3 he sided out one of his colors and just sided in a bunch of creatures. He just turned into like a low curve black-green deck, which is very effective against me, and I never played a 3rd land, so that was also effective.
So nice sideboarding, but perhaps unnecessary.
No, it was a really good plan, so I think it was smart of him to do that.
All right, so Luis is 11-1. Or is it 12-1 at this point?
11-1.
It's 11-1. 11-1. 12-1 maybe in the cards. We're sending it back to Rich Hagon at the desk.
All right, thanks very much to BDM. The players are getting up and ready. As you see, pairings are posted. Right now, though, we are going to squeeze in a deck tech, which could be interesting because it's a control deck tech. Maybe it won't take too long. Let's see what happens. Here comes Ian Duke and our special guest from East West Bowl, Andrew Brown.